War in the ancient world was not simply a contest between armies. It was a brutal test of human will where courage meant survival, and fear could mean a fate worse than death. Imagine standing in a long line of soldiers beneath the burning sun. Your shield trembles in your hand. Across the dusty battlefield, the enemy advances like a dark wave. The horns sound. The ground begins to shake beneath thousands of marching feet. For most soldiers, fear was inevitable. But in many ancient armies, showing fear was not merely shameful, it was a crime, and the punishment could be horrifying. In some legions, entire units were executed for the cowardice of a few. In others, soldiers who broke formation were beaten to death by their own comrades. Generals believed terror was a necessary weapon, one that could turn frightened men into unbreakable warriors. From the disciplined ranks of Roman legions to the unforgiving training fields of Sparta, ancient commanders created systems of punishment so severe that many soldiers feared their own army more than the enemy. This is the brutal story of how ancient armies punished fear, and why terror itself became one of the most powerful tools of war. To understand why ancient armies punished fear so harshly, we must first step into the world of ancient warfare, where discipline often determined the fate of entire civilizations. In modern times, soldiers operate within structured systems of law and command. Yet in the ancient world, military organization was far more fragile. Armies were often made up of farmers, laborers, and citizens who had been called to fight. Training was limited, communication was slow, and the chaos of battle could shatter an army within minutes. If even a small group of soldiers panicked and fled, the entire formation could collapse. Once that happened, defeat often followed swiftly, and defeat in the ancient world was catastrophic. Cities were burned, populations were enslaved, entire cultures could vanish because of this. Ancient commanders developed a ruthless understanding. Fear was contagious. If one soldier broke ranks, others might follow. Panic could spread through a formation faster than any enemy charge. The solution, in the minds of many military leaders, was brutal discipline. Among the most feared systems of punishment existed within the Roman legions. Rome built one of the most powerful military machines in history, not only through strategy and engineering, but through relentless enforcement of discipline. Roman soldiers were expected to obey orders without hesitation, even if it meant marching directly into death. Any sign of cowardice, desertion, or disobedience could result in savage consequences. But Rome was not unique. Centuries earlier in Greece, the warriors of Sparta were raised from childhood to believe that fear itself was dishonorable. Spartan society revolved around warfare, and young boys entered the Agate Sparta's brutal state training system at the age of 7. There, they were taught to endure pain, hunger, and humiliation. Weakness was punished mercilessly. A Spartan soldier who fled the battlefield did not simply face punishment from commanders. He faced something worse: social death. Cowards were shunned by their communities, forbidden from speaking in public gatherings, and often forced to live lives of deep humiliation. In other ancient cultures, discipline was enforced through physical terror. Assyrian armies, among the most feared forces of the ancient Near East, used extreme violence both against enemies and within their own ranks. Kings such as Ashurbanipal believed that maintaining absolute control over their armies was essential for maintaining the empire itself. Across the vast Persian Empire, commanders also relied on strict military codes. Armies composed of diverse peoples from Egypt to Central Asia needed unity on the battlefield. Fear, again, was the greatest threat to that unity. Ancient warfare was fought at terrifyingly close range. Soldiers could see the whites of their enemies' eyes. They could hear the screams of wounded men and smell the metallic scent of blood in the dust. In such conditions, even the bravest warriors could feel the instinct to run. For ancient generals, that instinct had to be crushed. And so, across civilizations, systems of punishment evolved rituals of violence designed to ensure that no soldier would dare show fear. These punishments were not merely disciplinary measures. They were warnings, and sometimes the warning was meant for the entire army. Among the many systems of punishment used in ancient armies, one stood out for its cold, calculated cruelty. The Romans called it decimation. The word itself carried a chilling meaning: the killing of 1 in every 10 men. Decimation was not a punishment aimed at a single soldier. It was directed at an entire unit that had failed in its duty, whether through cowardice, desertion, or mutiny. The logic behind it was terrifyingly simple. If a legionary knew that his own failure might cause the death of his comrades, fear of punishment would outweigh fear of the enemy. When a Roman unit disgraced itself in battle, the soldiers were assembled by their officers. There was no dramatic trial, no long speeches. Instead, the men were divided into groups of 10. Then came the lottery. Each group drew lots, often small stones or pieces of wood. One man would draw the fatal marker. That soldier had been chosen by fate, but the horror did not end there. The condemned man was not executed by officers. He was killed by the 9 men standing beside him, his own comrades, using clubs or stones. The purpose of this ritual was psychological. It forced soldiers to become participants in the punishment. They would never forget the moment they had beaten a fellow legionary to death, and they would never risk experiencing it again. The earliest recorded uses of decimation occurred during the Roman Republic, a period when Rome was fighting for survival against powerful enemies such as Carthage. Roman commanders believed that only absolute discipline could hold their legions together during catastrophic defeats. One famous example came during the long and brutal wars against Carthage in the 3rd century BCE. Roman armies suffered devastating losses during this conflict, particularly at the hands of the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal. His tactical genius led to one of the most disastrous defeats in Roman history. At the Battle of Cannae, tens of thousands of Roman soldiers died in a single day. In the aftermath of such catastrophes, Roman leaders feared that the morale of their armies would collapse. Some units had fled the battlefield in panic. For Roman commanders, such behavior was intolerable. To restore discipline, punishments were imposed with ruthless severity, and decimation was sometimes the chosen method. Yet the Romans were not alone in using terror as a tool of discipline. In Sparta, fear was controlled in a different way through lifelong conditioning. Spartan soldiers were taught that retreat was the ultimate disgrace. Their mothers famously told them to return from battle with their shield or on it. The meaning was simple: come home victorious or come home dead. A Spartan who abandoned his shield had likely thrown it away while fleeing. Such a man would live under a cloud of dishonor. Fellow citizens refused to speak with him. Women avoided him. Even children were taught to mock him. Unlike the swift brutality of Roman punishments, Spartan discipline created a permanent psychological prison. Elsewhere in the ancient world, commanders relied on immediate violence. Some Greek armies executed deserters on the spot. Assyrian officers sometimes used public beatings or mutilations to enforce obedience. The message was always the same: fear of the enemy might exist, but fear of punishment must be stronger. Yet the most terrifying aspect of these systems was not simply the punishment itself, it was the uncertainty. A soldier never knew when a commander might decide that discipline had failed, and when that moment came, punishment could fall upon an entire unit, guilty or innocent alike. Within the ranks of ancient armies, this knowledge created an atmosphere of constant tension. Men marched beside comrades who might one day be forced to kill them, and commanders understood exactly how powerful that fear could be. One of the most infamous moments of military punishment in Roman history occurred during the late Republic of time, when Rome's armies had grown powerful, but also dangerously independent. In the 1st century BCE, Rome was no longer simply defending its territory. Its legions marched across vast regions, conquering lands from Gaul to the eastern Mediterranean. These campaigns placed enormous pressure on soldiers. Long marches, brutal battles, disease, and exhaustion pushed many units to the breaking point. During one campaign in southern Italy, a Roman legion reportedly broke ranks during combat, abandoning its position in the face of enemy resistance. For a Roman commander, such an act threatened the entire army. If one legion fled, others might follow. Discipline had to be restored immediately. The commander ordered the surviving soldiers of the disgraced unit to assemble in formation. The men likely knew what was coming. Decimation had been used before, and its reputation was legendary. The soldiers were divided into groups of 10. Around them stood officers and other legionaries, watching silently. A container was brought forward, filled with marked stones. One by one, the soldiers reached inside and drew their fate. For 9 men in each group, the stone meant survival. For the 10th, it meant death. Imagine the moment when the soldier looked down and realized what he held in his hand. There was no appeal, no argument. The punishment was absolute. But perhaps the most horrifying part of the ritual came next. The condemned soldiers were handed over to their own comrades. 9 men surrounded the 10th. Some may have hesitated. Others may have struck quickly, eager to end the ordeal. Clubs and stones were used, not swords. The method was deliberate, forcing the act to be brutal and personal. The blows fell. Within minutes, dozens of soldiers lay dead at the hands of the very men who had marched beside them. For the survivors, the nightmare was not over. The punished unit was often forced to sleep outside the protective camp walls, receiving reduced rations of barley instead of wheat, another mark of disgrace. Yet the psychological effect of decimation was exactly what Roman commanders intended. After witnessing such an event, soldiers understood that cowardice would not save them. Running from the enemy might lead to something even worse. The power of this system lay in its terrifying logic. On the battlefield, fear pulls a man away from danger. But Roman discipline created a second fear, one that pushed him back toward it. Between these two terrors, many soldiers chose to stand their ground. Decimation was used only rarely because its effects were so extreme, but its reputation spread across the Roman military. Even generations later, soldiers knew the story. The mere threat of decimation could restore order within a troubled legion, and that threat sometimes came from the highest levels of Roman command. Centuries after the Republic, during the chaotic years of the Roman Empire's military crises, decimation was reportedly used again by commanders desperate to restore discipline. One emperor, known for his harsh methods, revived the punishment when legions showed signs of mutiny. By this time, the Roman army had changed dramatically, yet the ancient ritual still held its terrifying power. But Roman discipline was not the only form of military terror in the ancient world. In Sparta, the fear of dishonor could shape a soldier's life long after the battlefield. Greek writers recorded stories of Spartan men who survived battles but returned home in shame after fleeing combat. These men were forced to live as social outcasts. They were required to give up their seats in public gatherings. No one would marry into their families. Their reputation was permanently destroyed. For a society built around honor and reputation, this punishment could be worse than death. In Assyria, discipline could be even more direct. Assyrian relief carvings show soldiers being punished or executed in public settings. The empire ruled through displays of overwhelming force both against enemies and within its own ranks. Military obedience was absolute, because for ancient empires, the army was more than a fighting force. It was the foundation of political power itself. If discipline collapsed, the empire could fall with it. The brutal punishments used by ancient armies left deep marks not only on the soldiers who endured them, but also on the cultures that created them. For Rome, strict discipline became one of the defining characteristics of its military power. Roman legions were feared not simply because of their weapons or tactics, but because of their ability to maintain order in the chaos of battle. Where other armies might break under pressure, Roman formations often held firm. Historians have long debated how much of this resilience came from training and loyalty, and how much came from fear. The threat of decimation certainly lingered in the minds of soldiers, even when the punishment was not actively used. Its memory remained a powerful psychological weapon, yet such methods carried risks. Extreme punishments could breed resentment within the ranks. A soldier forced to kill his own comrade might obey out of fear, but that fear could also erode trust between commanders and their men. In some periods of Roman history, particularly during the later empire, harsh discipline contributed to growing tensions within the military. Mutinies did occur, sometimes violently, but despite these dangers, Roman commanders continued to believe that severe discipline was necessary for survival. Other ancient cultures reached similar conclusions. Sparta maintained its rigid military society for centuries, producing warriors famous for their endurance and unity. Yet even Sparta eventually declined, as demographic changes and political struggles weakened the state that had built such a fear-driven system. Across the ancient world, armies constantly walked a narrow line. Too little discipline could lead to panic and defeat. Too much brutality could destroy the loyalty that held an army together. The punishments designed to eliminate fear sometimes created a different kind of fear, one directed inward, toward the army itself, and for the individual soldier, the psychological burden could be immense. Ancient warfare demanded not only physical courage, but the suppression of one of the most basic human instincts, the desire to survive. Through ritualized punishments, commanders attempted to reshape that instinct, turning fear into obedience. Sometimes it worked, but the human cost was immense. When we imagine ancient warriors, we often picture fearless fighters charging bravely into battle, but the truth is far more complex. Ancient soldiers were human beings, men who felt the same terror that any person might feel when facing death. The difference was the world they lived in. In that world, fear was not merely a personal struggle. It was seen as a threat to the survival of entire armies and empires. So commanders turned to brutal solutions through punishments like decimation, social humiliation, and public executions. Ancient militaries attempted to control one of humanity's most powerful emotions, They believed that courage could be force shaped by terror as much as by honor, and in many cases, these methods succeeded. Disciplined armies conquered vast territories and built powerful empires. Yet behind those victories lay countless unseen moments, soldiers trembling in formation, knowing that the greatest danger might not come from the enemy ahead, but from the commanders behind them. The story of these punishments reveals a darker truth about the ancient world. Empires were not built only through strategy or heroism. They were also built through fear, and sometimes the most terrifying weapon on the battlefield was not the sword, but the discipline of the army that carried it.